This woman, her name is Kinsley, thought she had everything figured out. A loving fiancé of 4 years, a promising future, wedding plans for next summer. But one night of poor choices, followed by weeks of deception, would cost her absolutely everything. What she did wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice. And then another choice. And another. Until the man who loved her unconditionally couldn't recognize who she'd become. This is her story. And trust me, you'll want to hear every word of what happens when we convince ourselves that small lies can protect the people we love. I'm Emma, your storyteller here at Mrs. Emma, and today's story will show you exactly how a relationship can crumble. Not from one moment of weakness, but from the web of lies that follows. Let me take you back to where it all began. Kinsley was 25 years old, living what looked like a dream life from the outside. She and her fiancé, Garrett, had been together for 4 wonderful years. They'd relocated to a new state together so she could pursue her master's degree. They had an adorable apartment and a dog named Biscuit. Their social media posts attracted envious comments from friends who wished they had what this couple seemed to have. But behind closed doors, things weren't quite as perfect as they appeared. After living together for several years, Kinsley started noticing everything that bothered her about Garrett. He'd become predictable, monotonous even. Every single day followed the same pattern. He'd return from work at the exact same time, want to watch the identical television programs and order food from the same 3 restaurants on rotation. When Kinsley tried sharing her struggles with graduate school, desperately needing emotional support, Garrett would respond with practical solutions. As if she were a problem requiring a fix rather than his future wife, who needed someone to simply listen and understand. Living with him started feeling like living with someone who'd stopped really seeing her. What made everything worse was how Garrett seemed completely unaware of how overwhelmed she was. Kinsley was drowning in her graduate program, pulling all-nighters, stressing about her thesis, barely keeping her head above water. Meanwhile, Garrett continued his normal routine as if nothing had changed in their lives. When she'd express how overwhelmed she felt, he'd say things like, "Well, this program was your choice," or, "You just need to manage your time more effectively. Thanks for nothing, right?" Meanwhile, Kinsley was carrying all the emotional weight of their relationship. She planned their entire social calendar. She remembered birthdays for his family members. She kept track of every little detail while simultaneously trying to survive graduate school. And when Garrett would meet her classmates, the few times he actually made the effort, he'd sit there scrolling through his phone or making awkward comments that showed he wasn't even attempting to connect with the people who were becoming her closest friends. Her classmates, though? They understood. They were living through the same pressure, the same stress, the same exhausting late nights. When Kinsley talked to them about relationship issues, they'd actually engage with her. They'd offer real advice, not just tell her to communicate better, as if that phrase was some magical solution to every problem. The guys in her program, especially, would ask follow-up questions when she talked about things that mattered to her. They'd remember small details from previous conversations. They made her feel heard in a way she hadn't felt at home in months. One classmate in particular stood out. His name was Devin. Devin was always incredibly thoughtful about checking in on how she was handling the stress of the program. He had his own girlfriend back in his hometown, so Kinsley never thought twice about their friendship. He never made her feel like her problems were too complicated or too much to discuss. Slowly, Kinsley found herself looking forward to conversations with Devin, more than she looked forward to going home to Garrett. That should have been her warning sign. But at the time, she convinced herself it simply meant she was finally finding her people. Individuals who understood her and what she was trying to accomplish with her degree. Garrett always made her feel like her master's degree was just an expensive hobby she was pursuing instead of something that actually mattered for their future. So when her classmates suggested going out to celebrate finishing their midterm presentations, Kinsley was more than ready. She'd been working non-stop for weeks and felt she deserved to release some stress. She invited Garrett naturally, but of course he said he was tired and would rather stay home with Biscuit. Same old Garrett, choosing his comfort zone over supporting his fiancé during one of the most stressful periods of her life. Kinsley was disappointed, but not surprised. That response felt like the story of their entire relationship summed up in one sentence. The night started innocently enough. The group went to a downtown bar with karaoke and cheap drinks. All her classmates were there, including Devin. Everyone was ecstatic to finally relax after weeks of intense studying. The energy was electric. People were laughing, cutting loose, just being young and free. For the first time in forever, Kinsley felt like she could be herself without worrying about anything. She'll admit, she drank more than she typically would. But it had been such a stressful few weeks, and everyone was buying rounds for each other. Devin kept making sure she had a drink in her hand, which felt sweet and attentive. He asked about her presentation, and actually listened to her answers instead of just waiting for his turn to talk like so many people do. They ended up sitting beside each other for most of the night. Kinsley noticed he kept finding small reasons to touch her arm when he was talking or laughing at her jokes. Now Devin had always been somewhat flirty in class, but in that harmless way that doesn't mean anything serious. He had a girlfriend back home, so Kinsley never thought anything of it when he'd compliment her outfits or save her a seat in lectures. But that night felt different somehow. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was being outside the academic setting. But there was definitely some kind of chemistry between them that hadn't been there before, or maybe it had been there all along, and she was just finally allowing herself to acknowledge it. When their other classmates started leaving around midnight, Devin suggested they stay for one more drink. Just the two of them. Kinsley should have said no. She should have gone home to Garrett. But honestly, she was having more fun than she'd had in months. Devin was telling her how impressed he was with her work, how smart and driven she was. All these compliments Garrett never seemed to say anymore. Devin made her feel special, like someone worth paying attention to, like someone who mattered. That's when things escalated. He moved closer to her in the booth, started playing with her hair while they talked. He told her he thought she was beautiful and that her fiancé was incredibly lucky to have someone like her. Then he said something that hit her right in a vulnerable place. He said it seemed like Garrett didn't appreciate what he had, and that if Kinsley was his girlfriend, he'd never take her for granted the way Garrett did. Kinsley knows she should have shut it down right there. But God, it felt so good to hear someone say what she'd been thinking for months. Here was this guy who barely knew her, recognizing that she deserved better treatment than what she was getting at home. When Devin leaned in and kissed her, she was so caught up in feeling wanted and appreciated that she just went with it. The kiss was intense, more passionate than anything she'd experienced with Garrett in years. They made out right there in the booth for what felt like forever. His hands in her hair, hers on his chest. It felt like being desired again instead of just taken for granted. For those few minutes, she wasn't the stressed-out graduate student or the girlfriend who had to beg for attention. She was just a woman being appreciated for who she was. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily and staring at each other. The bar was closing. They had to leave. But neither of them wanted the night to end. In the cab, he kissed her again, softer this time, but somehow even more intimate. Kinsley knew she should tell the driver her address, but her phone was dead, and she was still buzzed and caught up in the moment. Devin gave the driver his address. Before she knew it, they were standing outside his apartment. He kissed her one more time under the streetlight, and Kinsley swears that kiss was different from anything she'd ever experienced. It was like he was seeing parts of her that had been invisible for years. When she finally came to her senses and asked him to call her a ride home, he did it right away without trying to pressure her to come inside. The whole ride home, she kept touching her lips, replaying those kisses in her mind. She felt guilty, but she also felt more alive than she had in months. It was like Devin had awakened something in her that had been sleeping for far too long. The next morning, she woke up next to Garrett, feeling like she was living a double life. He was getting ready for work like any other day, asking about her night out in that distracted way he always did, not really listening to her answers. She told him it was fun, kept it vague. He didn't push for details because he never really cared about her social life anyway. But inside, Kinsley was a mess. Part of her felt guilty about what happened with Devin, but another part kept replaying those moments and feeling this rush of excitement she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in forever, someone had made her feel desirable and interesting and worth pursuing. Devin had seen something in her that her own fiancé seemed to have forgotten existed. She tried focusing on her schoolwork, but she kept checking her phone, wondering if Devin would reach out. When he added her on Snapchat that afternoon, her heart started racing. She accepted the request before she could second-guess herself. His first message was casual, just a selfie with the caption, "Hope you're not too hungover today," with a winking face. She sent back a picture of her coffee with barely surviving, and just like that, they were in regular communication. At first, the messages were innocent enough. He'd send pictures of his lunch with funny captions. She'd send pictures of her textbooks with complaints about how much reading she had to do. But gradually, the messages got more personal. He'd send shirtless gym selfies. She'd send pictures in her pajamas studying late at night. Nothing too explicit, but definitely crossing lines she shouldn't have been crossing. The crazy thing was how easy it became to live this double life. During the day, she'd go to classes, come home to Garrett, make dinner, watch television like nothing had changed. But the whole time, she'd be thinking about Devon's messages, looking forward to their little exchanges throughout the day. He made her feel like she had this exciting secret life that was just hers. Garrett didn't notice anything different because honestly, he never paid that much attention to her moods anyway. When she was on her phone more than usual, he probably just thought she was texting classmates about assignments. When she took longer getting ready for school, he didn't comment. When she started wearing makeup to morning classes for the first time all semester, he didn't notice. Devon would compliment her outfits in their group chats. Remember little details about things she mentioned in passing. Ask thoughtful questions about her research. Meanwhile, Garrett would come home and grunt a hello before turning on his video games. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Kinsley kept telling herself she wasn't really doing anything wrong. They were just friends who happened to have some chemistry. People in relationships are allowed to have friends of the opposite sex, right? The fact that they'd kissed that one night was just a drunken mistake that didn't mean anything. As long as nothing else physical happened, she could justify keeping their friendship going. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. The way her pulse quickened when she saw his name on her phone, the way she'd find excuses to stay after class to talk to him, the way she started comparing everything Garrett did to how Devon might handle the same situation. None of that was innocent friendship behavior. The messages started getting more flirty. He'd send pictures with captions like, "thinking about you," or "wish you were here." She'd respond with pictures of herself looking cute with captions like, "missing our conversations." They both knew they were playing with fire, but it felt too good to stop. After about a week of this, Devon suggested they meet up to discuss what was happening between them. He said they needed to figure out their situation and decide how to handle it. Kinsley knew she should have said no, but she was curious about what he wanted to say. Plus, if they talked it through, maybe they could figure out how to be friends without all this tension. They met at a coffee shop near campus, somewhere neutral and public. But the second she saw him, all those feelings from that night came rushing back. He looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. Gave her his full attention in a way she hadn't experienced at home in years. He told her he couldn't stop thinking about their night together. That he'd never connected with someone the way he connected with her. He said his relationship back home felt stale and routine compared to the energy he felt when they were together. Sound familiar? Then he said the thing that really got to her. He said she deserved to be with someone who appreciated everything about her. Someone who made her feel as special as she really was. She knew he was right, even though she couldn't admit it out loud. They decided they needed to stop the flirty messages and keep things professional at school. But they both knew that was easier said than done. For the next week, Kinsley tried to act normal and focus on her relationship with Garrett. But the guilt was eating her alive. Every time he'd do something sweet, like bring her coffee while she was studying or rub her shoulders after a long day, she'd feel horrible about what she'd done. But then he'd go right back to his usual routine of ignoring her for his phone or his video games, and she'd remember why she felt so disconnected from him in the first place. The worst part was how the secret was affecting their intimacy. When Garrett would try to be affectionate, all she could think about was how different it felt with Devon. How passionate and exciting those kisses were compared to the routine affection she got at home. Garrett could tell something was off, but instead of really talking to her about it, he'd just make jokes about how stressed she was with school. 2 weeks after it happened, Kinsley finally couldn't take the guilt anymore. She was having a breakdown about her thesis, crying at the kitchen table with her laptop open, and Garrett came over to comfort her. He was being so sweet, stroking her hair and telling her everything would be okay. And she just lost it. The words came tumbling out before she could stop them. "I kissed someone," she said through her tears. "At the bar 2 weeks ago, I kissed Devon from my program." The look on Garrett's face was something she'll never forget. Not angry, exactly, but hurt and confused and disappointed all at once. He pulled his hand away from her hair and just stared at her for the longest time. "What do you mean you kissed someone?" he finally asked. Kinsley tried to minimize it, make it sound like less than it was. She told him they were both drunk, that it was just a stupid mistake, that it didn't mean anything. She said it was just one kiss at the bar, and that she'd felt guilty about it ever since. She was hoping if she presented it as this tiny moment of weakness, something they could work through together, maybe they could move past it. But Garrett wasn't satisfied with her explanation. He kept asking questions. How long did it last? Was their tongue involved? Did she kiss him back, or did he force himself on her? Kinsley tried to stick to her story about it being just one brief kiss, but she could tell he wasn't buying it. "If it was just one innocent kiss, why did it take you 2 weeks to tell me?" he asked. That question hit her hard because she didn't have a good answer. She couldn't exactly say she'd been enjoying the secret relationship that developed afterward. The next day, he brought it up again. Said he'd been thinking about it all night, and something didn't add up. He asked if there was more to the story she wasn't telling him. That's when Kinsley decided to come clean about the Snapchat messages. But she presented them as innocent exchanges that only happened because she felt bad about the kiss and wanted to clear the air with Devin. She showed Garrett some of the messages, carefully selecting the most innocent ones, the pictures of coffee cups and textbooks. Not the gym selfies or the late-night pajama shots. She made it sound like Devin had been pursuing her and she'd been trying to let him down easy. Garrett was quiet for a long time after reading through the messages. Then he said something that surprised her. "I can try to work through this, but things need to change." He laid out his conditions: full access to her phone and social media, no more going out without him, no more private conversations with Devin, and complete honesty about everything moving forward. At first, Kinsley was relieved that he was willing to give them another chance. But then she started feeling defensive about his requirements. "You're treating me like a child," she told him. "I made one mistake and now you want to monitor everything I do?" "You didn't make one mistake," he said. "You made a series of choices over 2 weeks to hide this from me and maintain contact with someone you were inappropriate with." Kinsley got upset because he was making it sound so calculated when really she'd just been confused and trying to figure things out. She accused him of being controlling, said he was using this as an excuse to micromanage her life. Looking back, she can see how defensive and unreasonable she was being. But at the time, she felt like he was punishing her too harshly for what seemed like a minor slip-up. Eventually, she agreed to his terms. But she was resentful about it. She felt like he was being dramatic and making a bigger deal out of this than it needed to be. After all, she'd been the one to confess. Didn't that count for something? But here's the thing about agreeing to conditions when you're not really sorry. You end up breaking them without meaning to. Garrett would ask to see her phone, and she'd get annoyed, like he was invading her privacy. When he wanted to come with her to study groups, she'd complain that he was cramping her style and making her classmates uncomfortable. The worst part was that she still had to see Devin every day in class. They'd agreed to keep things professional, but there was still this energy between them that was impossible to ignore. He'd catch her eye during lectures and smile, find reasons to partner with her for group projects. Nothing inappropriate, but definitely not the complete cutoff that Garrett was expecting. Garrett could sense that she wasn't fully committed to rebuilding trust. He'd catch her rolling her eyes when he asked about her day or getting defensive when he wanted to know who she'd been texting. Instead of recognizing that his requests were reasonable given what she'd done, Kinsley kept focusing on how his behavior was making her feel controlled and suffocated. The breaking point came 3 weeks later when Garrett asked her point blank if there was anything else about that night she hadn't told him. Something about the way he asked made her realize he knew there was more to the story. Maybe he could tell from her body language, or maybe the details she'd given him didn't quite add up. But he definitely suspected she was still hiding something. That's when Kinsley finally told him about the cab ride, about going to Devin's apartment, about the additional kisses outside his place. She watched Garrett's whole world crumble as she spoke. This wasn't just some drunk kiss at a bar anymore. This was his fiancé spending extended intimate time with another man, going back to his place, continuing the physical contact even after leaving the bar. "So you lied to me," he said quietly. For 3 weeks, you looked me in the eye every day and lied about what really happened. Kinsley tried to explain that she hadn't technically lied. She just left out some details because she didn't want to hurt him more than necessary. But even as she said it, she knew how ridiculous it sounded. She had absolutely lied to him, and they both knew it. I trusted you, he said. After you cheated on me, I still trusted you enough to try to work through this. And you used that trust to lie to my face every single day. He said he needed to talk to his friends about everything, which made Kinsley panic. She begged him not to tell anyone, said it would be humiliating for both of them if people knew their business. She made it about how it would affect her reputation at school, how people would judge her and treat her differently. So you can cheat on me and lie to me, but I can't even talk to my friends about it? He asked. You're more worried about your reputation than about fixing what you broke. Kinsley realized how selfish that sounded, but she was desperate. The thought of their friends and families knowing what she'd done made her sick to her stomach. She'd worked so hard to maintain this image of being the perfect girlfriend, the one everyone envied. If this got out, that would all be ruined. But Garrett was done listening to her concerns about image management. He said he needed support from people who cared about him, and that after weeks of lying, she'd lost the right to make demands about how he handled his own emotional needs. That's when Kinsley knew she'd really messed up. Not just the cheating, but everything that came after. The lies, the defensiveness, the selfishness. She'd had a chance to make this right, and she'd blown it completely. What happened next was like watching her entire life fall apart in slow motion. Garrett didn't just leave. He completely transformed into someone she didn't recognize. The man who used to accommodate her every mood, who avoided confrontation, who let her control most of their social calendar, he suddenly had this quiet strength that she'd never seen before. He started going to the gym every morning before work. He signed up for therapy. He reached out to old friends he hadn't talked to in years. It was like her betrayal had woken him up from some kind of sleep, and now he was becoming the version of himself he was supposed to be all along. And honestly, it was terrifying for Kinsley to watch. The worst part was how calm he was about everything. She kept expecting him to yell at her, to fight for their relationship, to beg her to explain why she'd thrown away 4 years together. Instead, he was just done. He'd look at her with this sad, tired expression and say things like, I thought I knew who you were, and I can't be with someone who can lie to my face for weeks. Kinsley tried everything to win him back. She wrote him long letters explaining how sorry she was, how the whole thing with Devin meant nothing, how she'd never make another mistake like that again. She offered to drop out of graduate school and move back home with him. She said she'd go to couples therapy, individual therapy, whatever he wanted. She even offered to cut off all her male friends and give him complete access to everything in her life forever. But none of it mattered because she could tell he was already mentally gone. He'd listen to her speeches about how much she loved him and how they could work through this. And then he'd just nod and say something like, I believe you mean that right now, but I don't trust that you won't change your mind when things get hard again. The thing that really got to Kinsley was how he started talking about their relationship in the past tense. We had some good times, he'd say. Or, I'm glad we got to experience that together. Like they were already broken up, even though they were still living in the same apartment, still sleeping in the same bed. 3 months after she confessed, he told her he was moving out. He'd already found a place across town, already started looking into breaking their lease. He said he'd tried to forgive her, but every time he looked at her, all he could think about was how she'd lied to him day after day while he was trying to rebuild trust. I keep waiting to feel like I can trust you again, he said. But it's been 3 months, and if anything, I trust you less now than I did right after you told me. Because now I know you're capable of looking me in the eye and lying about something this big for weeks. Kinsley begged him to give them more time, said 3 months wasn't long enough to heal from something like this. But he said the timeline wasn't the problem. The problem was that she'd shown him who she really was when things got tough, and he couldn't unsee that. The night before he moved out, she tried one last time to change his mind. She told him about all the good memories they'd made, reminded him of all the plans they'd had for their future, said she'd spend the rest of her life making this up to him if he'd just give her the chance. He listened to everything she had to say. And then he said the thing that absolutely broke her. You know what's funny? When you first told me about kissing Devin, I was hurt. But I thought we could work through it. It was the lying that killed us. Not the cheating. The lying. The fact that you could look at me every day for weeks. Let me comfort you when you were crying about school stress. Let me make plans for our wedding, all while knowing you were keeping this huge secret from me. That's what I can't get past. And honestly, he was right. Kinsley could have saved their relationship if she'd just been honest from the beginning. But instead, she tried to manage the situation, control the narrative, protect her own image. And in doing that, she'd lost the one person who'd loved her unconditionally for 4 years. Now, she's sitting here 6 months later, completely alone. Garrett moved on faster than she ever thought possible. Last month, she saw on social media that he's dating someone new. This sweet-looking woman who works as a nurse. Someone who probably never made him question whether he could trust her basic honesty. They look happy together in a way that she and Garrett never looked happy, not even in their best times. Meanwhile, Kinsley is struggling to make connections with anyone. Turns out when you develop a pattern of lying and manipulating situations to make yourself look better, it's hard to build genuine relationships. Even potential dating app matches can sense something's off about her, like she's performing instead of just being real. She keeps telling herself that Garrett was too sensitive, that most guys would have gotten over one night of kissing after a few months. She tells herself that his new girlfriend probably doesn't challenge him or push him to grow the way she did. But deep down, she knows the truth. She had something real, and she destroyed it because she couldn't handle a few weeks of stress without seeking validation from another man. Sometimes she wonders what would have happened if she'd just told Garrett the truth right away. If she'd come home that night and confessed everything instead of trying to manage the situation. But there's no point in wondering about that now. So there you have it. Kinsley's story is a devastating reminder that relationships don't usually end from one mistake. They end from the lies we tell to cover up that mistake. Garrett was willing to forgive her infidelity, but he couldn't forgive the weeks of deception that followed. He couldn't forgive watching her look him in the eye every day while hiding the truth. The real tragedy here isn't that Kinsley kissed someone else. It's that she had a chance to save her relationship through honesty, and she chose to protect her image instead. What do you think about Kinsley's story? Was Garrett too harsh, or was his decision to leave completely justified? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends. These stories matter, and they help us all learn from each other's mistakes. And don't forget to subscribe to Mrs. Emma so you never miss another story like this one. I post new stories regularly, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until next time, remember, the truth might hurt in the moment, but lies destroy everything in the end. This is Emma, signing off.